I'll be talking today about popular perceptions of atheists. I think on the schedule it has me listed as popular prejudice against atheists. You'll soon see that these are largely synonymous titles. So to begin, I wanted to play a quick game. So show of hands here, is there anyone in this room who does not believe in God? Show of hands, I won't tell. We'll call that a few of you. Hands down. All right, now think about those people who just raised their hands. And now raise your hand if you dislike, distrust, or otherwise find those people morally repugnant. We'll count a couple of hands. So I think I'm going to try to convince you that those two games show at least two ways in which you are a very strange group of people. If I were to assemble comparably sized groups in most places on Earth and ask those two questions, we'd find basically the exact opposite pattern in terms of when people are raising their hands. So I'll be talking again about negative perceptions of atheists. And just to illustrate one way in which this shows up, Gallup polls, they typically they run polls where they try to assess sort of cultural perceptions of different groups of people. So they say, all right, imagine a well-qualified member of your own preferred political party. Would you vote for them if they also happen to be fill in the blank? So you can look at what percentage of people say, yes, I would vote for this person, and that's kind of an index of cultural inclusion or exclusion. So I'll show you some recent data on this. So up here is 100% of people saying, yes, I would vote for that person. 0, 50%. So people overwhelmingly say, sure, I would vote for a Catholic candidate, or a black candidate, or a Mormon candidate, or a gay candidate, or a Muslim candidate. And I believe these are the data from 2007, and they had one group included that couldn't reach that 50% barrier, and people said, no, I would not vote for an atheist candidate. The only group included. Now, from a psychological perspective, this is a strange form of prejudice because, well, Will Gervais summarizes it quite nicely. He says that atheism is a worldview, much like not going skiing is a hobby. So we know nothing about atheists other than one thing that they don't do. So why is it that we have such strong opinions about them? Or in other words, what's driving people's negative perceptions of atheists? And I'm going to propose that a lot of people's negative perceptions of atheists really boils down to intuitions about morality and whether morality is ultimately rooted in religion in some way. So coming back to Azim's question, does God make us good? Do we need religion in order to be moral? Oh, whatever. So what is the relationship between religion and morality? We could start out by asking a scientist. You might now be getting why Azim and I switched positions. Because some scientists would say, yes, maybe there is a causal relationship. Something about some aspect of religion is actually driving some stuff that we would consider moral. So for instance, here are those dictator game studies that Azim was summarizing. You get people to think about religious concepts, they become more generous. Religious people are reporting that they give more money to charity. Religion helps people resist temptation. It increases self-control. So in this sense, something about religion does seem to be driving morality. On the other hand, we'd be able to ask other scientists the same question, and we might get an answer that, not really. Morality doesn't just boil down to religious stuff, which Azim would also agree with. So for instance, you have work of Franz de Waal, a primatologist, who works with non-human primates. And our closest primate relatives, chimps and bonobos, seem to have kind of the basic core building blocks of morality. You see essentially moral judgments in pre-verbal and presumably pre-religious infants. And some of our core intuitive moral judgments seem to be rather robust across variation in religion. So some aspects of religion might be driving some aspects of morality, but clearly that's not the entire story. Some of the core building blocks are already in place without religion. So our scientist would say, this is a complicated question. We don't have all the answers, but we're working on it. And that's the nuanced answer. For the rest of the talk, I'll be saying, well, what happens if instead of asking this question of scientists, what happens if we ask everyday folks? So what if we assess lay intuitions of this relationship between religion and morality? And specifically, might this be driving people's negative perceptions of atheists? So a lot of people, again, they seem to view morality as inherently rooted in religion, in this struggle between good and evil. I was supposed to put in a picture of the Ten Commandments. Just imagine that. So a lot of people would say that we get our actual moral laws from religion. Cue Ten Commandments photo. Above and beyond the actual moral rules, they'd say that a lot of our motivation to follow up on those rules comes because we believe in these supernatural agents that are monitoring our behavior. And these gods, it's not just that they're watching, but they can actually punish us when we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. And so potentially, if we're thinking about these supernatural agents, this will lead us to change our behavior and not engage in our basest urges. So that's a possibility. Is there any truth to the idea that people might think this way? So Pew has a nice global survey where they ask people whether or not they agree with the rather strongly worded statement, "It is necessary to believe in God in order to be moral and have good values." Necessary in order to be moral. And here in the US, 57% of people tend to agree with that statement. And the US isn't necessarily an outlier on this. So you'll see, for instance, in a lot of Europe, people are saying, well, no, of course you can be moral without belief in God. But in most of the rest of the world, most people are agreeing with that statement. So this leads to some predictions, and I'm going to focus on this one. So if people are viewing religion as a necessary component of morality, then they should intuitively assume that atheists are capable of engaging in immoral behavior. So if religion is driving morality, atheists don't have the religion, what's going to give them morality? So I'm going to walk through the general methods that I'll be using from a bunch of studies that I'm going to talk about. And I'm also doing Bastian a favor because he's using the exact same methods, so excellent. So the general task comes from Kahneman and Tversky. It's the conjunction fallacy task. And here's how it works. So here's their classic example. So here's Linda. Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Then I give you a question. Which is more probable? A, Linda is a bank teller, or B, Linda is a bank teller who is active in the feminist movement. You have to pick one. Typically, most people pick option B, even though logically it cannot be true. Feminist bank tellers are merely a subset of bank tellers in general. So what's going on? Is it just that people are stupid and that's why most people can't get this sort of elementary probability question wrong? It doesn't seem to be that. So the way the question is phrased, we get a description of Linda, and then option B implies a potential target group membership. And in this case, the description intuitively matches up with that target group membership. So there's this intuitive pull to pick option B rather than option A. It's just because the two fit together. But it's pretty easy to break this effect. You can independently manipulate either the contents of the description or the target group membership, and if they don't match up, all of a sudden people don't want to pick option B. So for instance, if I gave you that exact same description of Linda, and then I said which is more probable, A, she's a bank teller, or B, she's a bank teller and an avid big game hunter, you might be less intuitively inclined to pick option B. And I use this example in talks and in a paper, and one reviewer finally said, well, run that study. How do you know people wouldn't pick option B? And 0% of people pick option B if it's a big game hunter. So you break the effect if the description doesn't match the implied target. We thought with Azim and Ara back in 2011 or something like this, we can use this task to assess the degree to which people kind of intuitively assume that certain descriptions fit certain groups. So we came up with an example of an untrustworthy person. So we had Richard on his way to work. He backed his car into his neighbor's van, and he got out, and some people were looking, so he pretended to write down his contact information, and then he tucked this in the van and left. And then later in the same day, he's walking and he sees a wallet on the ground. Nobody's looking, so he takes the money out of the wallet and throws the wallet in a trash can. Not a nice guy. So then we would do this conjunction fallacy task, which is more probable. A, Richard is a teacher. B, Richard is a teacher, and then we plug in different groups to see which ones kind of cue this effect. So to orient you, I'm going to have different groups of people down here. Here's the percentage of people who pick option B. Big bar means people are intuitively saying this group fits that description. So for most groups we tried, we didn't really elicit the effect. So people given that description weren't thinking this person's gay, or this person's a Christian, or this person's a Muslim, or this person's a feminist. But lots of people given that description jumped to the conclusion that this person is probably an atheist. And so you might be asking, all right, well, that's 40, 50%. How big is this bar? We only found one group that scored comparably to atheists on this sort of indirect measure of distrust, and this was rapists. So let's take it how you will. So that was one example looking at intuitive distrust. But recently I wanted to expand this to look at issues of morality more broadly. And so Azim already nicely summarized some of the moral foundations work, where this is the idea that there are 5, maybe he's adding a sixth one, but these different categories of moral judgments. So for instance, harm. We don't like it if you hurt others for fun. Issues of fairness, stealing's no good. Loyalty to your in-group. Respect for authority. Or there are also purity concerns. If you're familiar with moral foundations theory, you know why there's a chicken there. If not, you'll find out soon. So across these studies, I wanted to give people descriptions of people violating each of these categories of morality, and then see if they intuitively assume that the perpetrator is an atheist, rather than somebody who belongs to some other group. So some people got a harm example. So somebody is sitting on the bus on the way home from work, and an obese woman gets on the bus. And rather than give up his seat, this person decides to ridicule the woman about her appearance. Then he gets off the bus and he's walking home, and a stray dog runs up. So he kicks it in the head really hard. So this is a violation of harm. For fairness, we have somebody who essentially isn't a good friend or neighbor. Somebody helps him move into a new apartment, and then when she asks him for help, he blows her off. And he also likes to go to the bar to play poker, and if he's playing with people he doesn't know, he cheats in order to take their money. For violations of loyalty, we have the example of Leslie, who's an American, but she's traveling in Europe, and she pretends to be Canadian. And she roots against the American Olympic team that year. And this causes some friction with her family, so she cuts off all ties with her family for a year. So she's turning against family and country. For violation of authority, we have the story of Drew, who doesn't like her boss. So one day, her boss is walking away, and she flips him off. And then she's walking home from work that day, and some police are setting up a barricade for a parade the next day, and they politely ask her to find a different way home. And she tells them to go fuck themselves, and she walks through the barricade anyway. Finally, for purity, we have a classic example from Jonathan Haidt, where we have the story of Catherine, who's working in a medical school pathology lab. And they've finished working with this cadaver, and it's going to be cremated the next day. And she thinks to herself, what a tremendous waste of perfectly edible meat. So she cuts off some flesh from this person and goes home and cooks it and eats it. So people would get one of these descriptions of a moral violation. Then they get the conjunction task, which is more probable. A, this person is a teacher. B, this person is a teacher, and some of them get a potential atheist target. Some of them get a potential gay target. So let's see which of these moral violations seem to fit with either the atheist or gay target. And it turns out that people are intuitively viewing atheists as potential puppy kicking, poker cheating, Canadian feigning, scofflaw cannibals. So for each potential moral violation, people are intuitively making the leap that this person might be an atheist. So that's some support for this general prediction. I wanted to consider other potential groups to compare to. So atheist versus gay is a nice comparison, but it'd be good to broaden the search a bit, and also consider other types of moral violations. So I had one study where I decided to look at consensual incest. This is another Jonathan Haidt example where you have a brother and sister backpacking through Europe, and one night they decide to have sex with each other. They use multiple forms of birth control. They never tell anyone. Nonetheless, a lot of people kind of have the gut reaction that this is not right. So we give people a description of consensual incest. Then we do the conjunction task. And so this time I wanted to compare it across different potential religious identities to see if it's an atheist thing or just a religious outgroup thing. And it turns out nobody seems to think that members of these various religious groups might be likely to engage in incest. But again, atheists are probably into that. Now we get the chicken example, this one again from Jonathan Haidt. So this one is the story of Jack, he's on his way home from work, and he stops at a butcher shop, and he picks up a chicken to cook for dinner. So he gets home and he unwraps the chicken, and before he cooks it, he has sex with it. Then he cleans it out, then he roasts it and eats it alongside a nice glass of Chardonnay. We do the exact same task. Now we'll compare against ethnic groups. And it turns out none of the ethnic groups are listing the effect. People don't think, for instance, that Hispanic Jack is likely to have sex with his chicken before he eats it. But they think atheist Jack might have sex with the chicken before eating it. For the final example, I wanted to turn to a more severe moral violation. So all of these initial ones are kind of weird and bizarre, but in terms of consequentialist morality, they're not that bad. We don't like the puppy kicker, but most of the rest of them are just bizarre. So I wanted to come up with one unambiguously immoral description. So we had Dax when he was a little kid. He liked hurting animals in his neighborhood. And then as he grew up, he didn't get much fun out of hurting animals anymore, so he started hurting people. And now he has the dismembered bodies of 5 homeless people buried in his basement. Basically trying to see if I could come up with something so bad that people wouldn't think an atheist would do it. Comparing to different religious groups, people don't think that most of these religious groups might be a serial killer, but they think that the serial killer is probably an atheist. Now, I haven't really talked too much about my subjects in all of this. So you might be asking yourself a question somewhat along these lines. Who are these people who have this intuition? So across all those studies, I asked people to rate their belief in God from 0 to 100, so Dawkins to devout. And you can see this isn't a strongly religious population. I get kind of this weird bimodal distribution where I have some religious people and some non-religious people. And I actually, across all these studies, did an aggregate analysis where I grabbed only people who self-identified as atheists and rated their belief in God at 0 to see if they would show the same effect. And it turns out that they do. So to a much smaller extent than the overall effects, but even my atheists still think that these perpetrators of immoral acts are more likely to belong to, they're more likely to be atheists than to belong to any of those other groups. Now, these were all participants in America, so maybe this is a weird American problem. Maybe people here are assuming that without religion, you're capable of engaging in various immoral actions. But what about the rest of the world? So I took the serial killer example and got in touch with friends and friends of friends and acquaintances of acquaintances, and we decided to run the study again in the US, as well as in a few other places around the globe. There we go. So here's the list of countries where this has been run. And notice that we have some of the least religious countries on Earth represented here. So we've got the Czech Republic, we've got the Netherlands, we have mainland China. Australia and New Zealand tend to not be that strongly culturally religious. Data are still rolling in. So we don't have the New Zealand data yet. But it turns out if we look at all these other countries, where does this effect show up? So where do people still intuitively assume that the serial killer is likely to be an atheist? And it turns out that the effect holds up everywhere we've looked so far except for in Finland. So if we wanted to put that back up on the map, all of the red dots or arrows are where people intuitively think that atheists might be immoral. And that solitary purple arrow is where they think that atheists are all right. And again, looking at this whole sample, if I still only poll the people who rate their belief in God at 0, they're still showing the same effect, albeit to a smaller extent. So to summarize, what's driving people's negative perceptions of atheists? I think it might have to do with people's intuitive perceptions about the origins of morality. And this is nicely summarized by Dostoevsky back in the day. So without God in the future life, it means that everything is permitted now. One can do anything. So without religion to keep you honest, are you capable of doing whatever you want? And at least according to my participants, they're saying, well, yeah, you're capable of potentially engaging in lots of immoral actions if you're not religious. So I need to thank the people. I took names for all of the people in my scenarios in these studies from friends and family without asking them. So I can thank them now. And also thanks to the people who've helped out with this research over the years.